taking over the meeting.
Spending time with us on this beautiful day. I'd like to welcome everyone here and yeah, and also thank the people that have been working hard in between meetings to push the issue, get publicity. There's been a couple good articles written about Cornwall housing events and issues in the Lakeford Journal, and John has posted those on the Cornwall website. So the latest piece came out, which I think is really good, and I haven't read through it all, but there's a special edition, a special insert in the Lakeville Journal that details what each town is doing in Connecticut and New York State adjacent for to do things to increase housing options in the area. And we're always open to steal other people's great ideas. Looking at the title of the piece about Millerton Northeast, and it says housing is more than just units, it's also about people. Good thought. And in Cornwall we have, I don't know if everyone can read that, but Cornwall, a town with a big heart at work at a plan. So that means us.
What issue was that, Gordon?
What?
How
That
long
was the
ago was that?
That was the most current recent edition of the Lakeville Journal that came out on Thursday. So it should be available at newsstands or locally at the country market. So it's really good. I mean, there's
Yeah,
a
I
lot
think
of
it's available
stuff.
online too.
Oh, there you go. 21st century right there. No, I think it's really good. Just saying, but it is encouraging to see what other towns are doing, and the fact that the journal felt this was enough of an important issue to put it out they filled up a 32-page insert on this, calling it, the lead article is the housing squeeze in the tri-state region. So, and it's, it's not just tri-state, it's across the country, it's across the world right now, especially with inflation and everything else happening. It's a big deal. So anyway, thank especially Mag and Ingrid, who did a great job on I think you had 60, 70 people attend a forum on housing. And again, I think a lot of this is just, outreach, communication, demystifying issues and trying to come up with practical suggestions about what we can do. So that's my welcome and thank you. We have next a review of the town housing plan, which I didn't have any huge additions to make to that, other than two big things that are happening simultaneously is our efforts to look at some sort of housing funding mechanism, and also planning and zoning is tackling accessory dwelling units, and I believe they have scheduled a hearing to actually opt out of the state statute, which deals with accessory dwelling units, feeling that we could do better with a Cornwall version. And the housing plan did call for us not to opt out. On further reflection, the zoning commission felt there was more latitude by doing our own thing. So I don't know, Anna, do you want to just sort of bring people up to date on that? Use our soapbox to be your soapbox, or at least announce current thinking on that, because I'm not sure everybody's glued to their screen.
Yeah. The public hearing is June 14th at 7. Our planning consultant, land use planning consultant, has been in contact with quite a few different land use lawyers because she works for several of the other towns in the northwest corner. And all these lawyers are advising towns to opt out. And the reason is fairly simple. Unless the town adopts the entire language of the law as written, they should opt out. If the town wants to add on other features that are more liberalizing or make things more difficult, then they're not allowed to do that. So the Planning and Zoning Commission knows that our accessory apartment regulation or accessory dwelling unit regulation is actually already in some respects more liberal than the statute proposes. We'd like to just start there and add other features that would make accessory dwelling units easier to obtain in Cornwall. And we can do that better if we opt out. So it's kind of complicated. And as part of the affordable housing subcommittee, I certainly bought into the idea of not opting out, but now I know different. And there is quite a good article coming out in the June 1st Chronicle that's written in pretty straightforward language that will explain what I've just said, probably even much better than I did.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Are there any questions about that part of the plan? Let's see, let me go to that so I can actually see people. Yeah, great. So any other thoughts, comments that people had on rereading the plan? Questions before we get into Jocelyn's recommendation? This committee is really tasked with only one part of the plan. There are other things that are hopefully going to happen as far as doing more affordable rental units and other things. But this group is looking primarily at a funding mechanism. So any other comments on the plan as it stands?
That's a good question about that, Gordon, is that, and I understand I'm in this committee, there's certainly a lot to do on the Housing Trust Fund to set that up, but it also strikes me, right, there's a lot to do to just sort of get more housing built in Cornwall. And I don't know whether, and maybe this is a question for Maggie too, it's sort of like, you know, how much can this committee or can some group help the housing corporation? And there was a lot in the plan about sort of identifying parcels, working with the state, trying to get private owners. Are there ways that we can think about, you know, finding sites and encouraging some mission-driven developers to come and build some rental housing?
Well, I think Gordon is always on the prowl for sites. The Housing Corporation ditto. You know, every time we have a meeting, we discuss possibilities. The funding mechanism is key to that. The one thing that you mentioned that we absolutely have never approached is finding whatever you call the mission-oriented developers.
Yeah.
And the other part of that is we've also over the years talked a lot with the Land Trust about keeping us in mind when they're talking to people who are giving healthy chunks.
Mm-hmm.
But how would you go about finding mission?
Well, I mean, you know, it depends. I mean, I think that, you know, there are a lot of affordable housing developers around in Connecticut and New York, and they don't have as much experience. I don't know as many in sort of more rural areas, but you might find a group that's interested. It could be also that maybe there's a mixed income project that could be useful for Cornwall that would have some kind of, you know, modest but kind of market rate rental units that would cross-subsidize the affordable units, and that
Right.
might get a broader set of developers interested.
Yeah.
But again, and this wouldn't, I'm not talking about building 100 units. This could be,
Right.
but again, I don't know whether, I just wasn't sure if institutionally that's already, and maybe this is again for a different meeting, but I'm just, whether the housing corporation could use assistance.
I think it all starts with land, and land all starts with money. So I think we're at the heart of it in talking about the Housing Trust Fund. What do you think, Jocelyn? Where did Jocelyn go? Oh, there she is. Hi. What do you think, Jocelyn, regionally? Do people reach out to developers who are particularly interested in affordable housing? I mean,
So
it's-
my experience over the last 15 years in our small towns in Litchfield County is that the mission-driven developers are the Cornwall housing corporations of each town. You know, there are a few other mission-driven affordable housing developers around. Women's Institute for Housing and Economic Development used to be one. They went out of business. You know, there are some that, you know, kind of work statewide, but honestly, I feel like I think you're talking about the key issue, which is access to land. And I think, you know, in as many ways as we can work to get the Cornwall Housing Corporation access to land, in my mind, that's really the key way forward. Because they are, you know, an experienced, capable developer of both rental and homeownership options in Cornwall. But certainly I think Cornwall Housing Corporation would be willing to consider partnering with another mission-driven developer if it needed to accomplish some specific project. My other quick thoughts, and you know, I think this is important. I do think that potentially, you know, as Maggie said, just being able to raise some more funds so that when parcels become available, you can act quickly to you know, get Cornwall Housing Corporation access to them. So that, you know, that's in keeping with the conversation topic for today's meeting. I would also say a couple other things at the, you know, the Litchfield County Center for Housing Opportunity, along with the Regional Housing Council. We're hoping to sponsor a webinar soon for people who might be considering donating land or buildings or money to their local affordable housing organization, to talk to them about the benefits, both the tax benefits and the community benefits of doing something like that. So in terms of this group, just maybe helping get the word out about a webinar like that, for example, and we can record it and have that available on YouTube or whatever for folks to watch at any time. You know, things like that. I think, again, the other thing this group has access to is this mini grant that the Foundation for Community Health and my organization have provided to do outreach. So I think it would be great, you know, again, through, you know, this group, we can identify some ways of, you know, like through a mechanism like a housing trust fund, you know, or just getting the word out to potential donors in various ways, and that, you know, that mini grant could be used to do that outreach within Cornwall.
Okay. That's helpful. I mean, yeah, I think that maybe again, I think that today, I mean, we should be talking about, you know, we have Jocelyn here and we should talk about the trust fund, but I do think maybe it would be useful to have a conversation, and maybe that is with the Housing Corporation, to really talk about some ideas for getting some land. I just don't want to lose that, because I think there's there's some potential and there's some good ideas in the plan.
Yeah, because I think also, I mean, that is one of the, I mean, I really liked what Jocelyn came up with, and there are a bunch of different things, all of which are, I think, worthwhile that this fund could do. And it is interesting to see what other towns have done. But again, one of the things is that the housing corporation right now does have some lots, and thinking about helping those get developed and using that for, pre-development funds or feasibility funds or whatever. I just think getting this going, the town could then, look at things like putting money, some public funds into this program, and as well as soliciting private things. And then you again can set up a fund that would help with engineering and site feasibility and a bunch of different stuff, which we don't have right now. But I think one of the question, and again, coming down to is with the housing corporation bill, would it be owner owned housing, or would be able to do some rental housing on the land that's already, in their ownership? And I guess, again, that's a question, but I think a lot of that can get facilitated by having a funding vehicle. So again, it's like chicken and the egg, or, where do you start? But I think having a place to start and funds available would be really good. And then again, having, as we said, an advocacy group separate from the housing corporation, but aligned and supportive, is a really good idea. This is in the plan also. But any thoughts on that, Maggie? I mean, if you had a fund, or what would be do you have any, as the housing corporation, gotten a sense of what would be, if funding was available, how would the land they own right now be developed, or what would be the first project? Or if there was money, I mean, it's not inconceivable that we've held back some of the ARPA funds. I don't think other towns are doing that, but it's certainly mentioned in the legislation. That's one of the possible uses of the ARPA money. And I had thought of using that's the American Rescue Plan money that we have put into other nonprofits. We have not put any money into housing. We've given money to some distressed businesses, but we have our second and final round coming up. And I guess if there's money available, Mag, what would be your first step in
Let me
the
just
land?
back up a second to say that what Jocelyn has been stirring up regionally is the discovery that there may be more public money out there than has been true in the previous couple of years. And as a regional group, we've been figuring out which bits could be used for what kind of projects, and maybe a regional approach to some things. Okay, that aside, one thing that we could use local money for would be matching grants from state level, because you always have to come up with money of your own to be competitive for these things. And if we were talking about homeownership programs, I think getting pre-development funds for septic would be huge, because that's always a crippling barrier when people are trying to start out. The housing corporation provides a driveway and up to $5,000 of a well. So those biggies are kind of taken care of. But the septic is a real stumbling block. Is that,
Maggie, could I add something?
yeah, that's, I'm looking at you. You can't tell me. You
Oh, I
can't tell.
can't tell. Yeah, so Gordon, there are a couple towns in the region that are utilizing their municipal ARPA funds to support affordable housing. Specifically, the town of Warren has provided $50,000 of its ARPA money to its local affordable housing organization, the Warren Affordable Housing Corporation. They actually just wrote them a check, and it's in their account. But specifically, they are going to use it to work on this project that they're doing that's on town-owned land in Warren.
Yeah.
And they're going to use it for some pre-development and infrastructure uses on that property. The town of Morris is taking to a town meeting on Wednesday, utilizing, I believe it's somewhere around 150,000 of their ARPA money to acquire a site in Morris for affordable housing. And I know that there's a few other towns in the region as well that are considering using their money that way, but those are the two towns in the region that have gotten the furthest along. So definitely it's an eligible use, as you said, Gordon, and I think it's a great idea, potentially to think about using some of that for infrastructure for the parcel, the parcels that the Cornwall Housing Corporation has. Again, Maggie, maybe the driveways and wells and septics, and then any funding that the Cornwall Housing Corp has could, help with some of the other pre-development costs. I don't know, just thinking off the top of my head, but I think it would be great if the town was open to an ARPA proposal around getting parcels, getting homeownership options built on those parcels as quickly as possible. And as Maggie mentioned, there is potentially some new funding out there for homeownership. And so we are, trying to get you guys access to that funding as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and going to your report there, Jocelyn, I just thought we should go through that, and I just thought it's a really good framework because most of the ideas that we can think about and we can all, obviously it's a lot more detailed work to be done, but if you look under the Center for Housing Opportunities, Litchfield County Housing Trust Fund, there are how many, 7, 8 possible uses for such money. And I like the idea of getting a new program going, but I don't want to rule out any of these other possible ideas in case we hit the jackpot somehow. So I just thought if nothing else today, can we go over that list, and is there anything there that people feel shouldn't be included, I guess? Again, I'm pushing to sort of getting some action on the land that's already there, and getting some seed money, getting the fund going, getting money coming in. There's a couple other vehicles that we could use, and then again, that it's I believe at least a town meeting. There's appointments that have to be made. You got to figure out who's gonna be in charge of this a little bit. But I just felt this was useful to say these are the possible uses. Does anybody have any reflections on those possible uses or other possible uses? I mean, for example, I know, even though it sounds like a lot of money, there's a house for sale in West Cornwall right now that the owner said, it has 2 apartments in it. He's listing it for, a substantial amount of money, but the amount of money he's listing it for is probably less than you can build apartments for right now. So again, if we had the money, it would make sense to have, affordable apartments in West Cornwall. But without the money, it's all just, it'd be great. But Where do we get the money? So, and again, it's hard when you hear about things that make sense to act quickly. Because everybody
Gordon,
else,
can I just throw in my 2 cents?
yeah, throw in more, throw in 25.
I guess I would just like to say, like, from my perspective, the kinds of uses that you're talking about, Gordon, are the critical ones. Being able to act quickly to acquire land, redevelopment funding, construction funding. And again, it wouldn't be that this fund would probably ever fund a whole development, but it would be, like Maggie said, matching funds for a bigger investment, and show again that the town had, was supportive of a specific development. So I would say personally, there are other sources of funding for down payment assistance, for accessibility modifications and repairs. Accessory apartments, I think, create sometimes housing that can be affordable by nature, but often they're Airbnbs or guest houses. So personally, I sort of, and this is completely unbiased, I do live in Salisbury, but the Salisbury Affordable Housing Fund, I sort of would look at that one if I were you guys in terms of a model, because it does focus on those uses, potentially, acquisition, pre-development, seed funding, construction and renovation, and not necessarily those other things, which I think could be icing on the cake, but I think there are other programs available to deal with those things. So that's just my opinion.
That
Yeah,
was
I think
what I thought too.
What?
I agreed with that the first 3 that Jocelyn had with an asterisk, some of them have already 3 possible sources of money. I mean, less flexible probably than a local source, but anyway, you can find it. So I would concentrate on the ones that aren't funded otherwise. And I was going to say, let's definitely concentrate on the Salisbury ordinances, because the people who have had to use the Goshen and the Washington ones have torn hair out by the fistfuls. So let's don't go there.
Yeah, I don't have much here to donate, so thank you.
Yeah, some of it was town politics, but yes,
Right.
I agree, Maggie.
Shocker. So no, I think that would I think those are good ideas. I think sort of where I'm going with this is because also July 1st we start a new fiscal year, and if it is I think it would be productive meeting if we can come to those conclusions, especially because it's a new fiscal year. I can then, with the Board of Selectmen's approval, unleash the town attorney on crafting a Cornwall ordinance that would make this happen, based on what's happened in Salisbury. And again, that would take some time and review to do that, but I think that would be a logical next step. And then I agree with Mag's thing. If things have other sources, then we should concentrate on things that may not have funding. And I know at some point, National Iron Bank manager Ron wants to come and talk about a program they have in Norfolk, which people can deposit money and then that gets put into a fund for down payments or something. I'm not sure quite on how all the details work, but instead of getting whatever you get now in a CD, which isn't much, you get somewhat less, and then they reduce the rate in which they fund things out. So there may be a way to do a separate targeted first time owners rental or down deposit program that may, help with that. thing if it's, you know, if it's held to be successful in Norfolk. So does that all make sense? I mean, I think if, again, it's just a draft and we're just starting, but I mean, my thought is, you know, orienting the fund towards these outlining tasks, and then working towards what they had in Salisbury would be significant progress. But that's just my thought. I also wanted to plug in to Heather, because she is frontline on, you know, the housing crisis as it's playing out in Cornwall and people's everyday experiences. And her advice is always welcome. So Heather, what do you think about all this? Is there something we're missing, or some need that would go unfulfilled? Granted, it's very hard to do everything with one bold move.
Well, I agree with the consensus around focusing in on the, I guess, lower 3 bullets on this list. I know I've made referrals to CHASA in the past for some of my clients. A lot of clients don't qualify for these programs, but I also am interested in whether or not Cornwall could move forward with something like the small city CDBG housing option, because like right now we're using either food and fuel money or habitat or neighbor to neighbor to fund these repairs. We've also had now multiple homes where we've had, including some parcel program homes, where we've sent in ultra clean to blitz the house because it was at the point of being condemned for lack of cleanliness. And that is all being funded either through food and fuel or neighbor to neighbor combination. So, and I think the other thing to consider is the number of people that we're supporting through regular infusions of funding toward their bills from food and fuel to help keep them in their homes, because in the absence of that fund, they would absolutely not be able to stay in Cornwall. So at any given time, I would say that 6 to 8 families for whom, if food and fuel wasn't an option, because they've exhausted all the other state programs, then they would, be out of their home. So I think remembering that and being able to track that as a metric is important, because in a way, Cornwall is keeping people in their homes, but we're not necessarily, shouting out about it. But that is a way that we are keeping Cornwall diverse.
Heather, how does the CDBG work for something like the rehab program? Would that be like a semi-permanent fund that we would get like one time and then be able to draw on periodically, or would it have to be spent down in a time certain?
Do you want me to answer
Yeah,
that?
that'd be great. Yeah.
So the small cities community development block grant money has in the past been awarded to towns, and actually the town of Salisbury got a grant for this housing rehabilitation. It's a revolving loan fund. And Salisbury actually got a grant for multiple towns. Cornwall was one of them, but it ran out of money pretty quick. So I will just say the CDBG funding applications actually just went in on Friday, so we missed this year, but I do think it's a good idea. I agree with Heather. I think it's a good idea, especially if you're seeing a lot of need for that, for the town to consider applying in the next round for small cities funding. I will say that the state, you never know what they aren't going to fund in any given round, but they've seemed to be going away from funding that type of program. But it's still something to put in, to keep in mind as the next round comes around. So usually what happens is you apply for a chunk of money, and the other thing about the housing rehabilitation loan funds is they're pretty administratively complicated. Um, and so typically you contract with some other contractor to do the administration of that program for you. And it used to be Larry Wagner that did this for all of the towns in Litchfield County. He's retired, but anyway, sorry, too much detail. But in any case, usually get a chunk of money and then you lend it out to income eligible families for whatever repairs they need and can't afford to make that will keep them in their homes. And again, it is income eligible homeowners. The work has to get bid out, you know, again, it's a little complicated, but you hire somebody else to do that for you. And then the revolving loan fund portion is that it's usually, I believe it's a 0% interest loan to the income eligible homeowner. And then it doesn't have to be repaid until they transfer title to their house or pass away, which is another way of transferring your title. And then it gets repaid into back to the town, and the town can then lend the money out to another homeowner. So sometimes that can take 5 years, sometimes it can take 50 years. But actually other towns in the region have been getting repayments, and then actually they have it available to lend out to other income eligible homeowners, or you can actually repurpose sometimes those funds for another affordable housing purpose with the approval of the Department of Housing. So it can become another pot of money that potentially, you know, again, comes back around and is available again to the community for affordable housing purposes. So yeah, I think it's a great idea to think about that the next time CDBG applications come around and consider applying. The reason we did a regional approach back when Salisbury applied, I don't know how many years ago it was, is because typically in any one community, there aren't really enough people needing it at any one time. Ella knows that. Ella's shaking her head. She remembers when we did this way back when.
It was great.
It's really good. It's just, again, for a small town, it was a little, we weren't able to show the demand, but Heather, maybe if you start kind of tracking, or I'm sure you track how many folks you're providing that type of assistance. So, you know, maybe we can show the demand, you know, if you're tracking that over the next year, that would be enough to make it competitive. Or, you know, or again, maybe we could link up with one other neighboring town or something to apply. Sorry for my long answer to your question.
No, that's all good. That's all good. And I think that is something that we should look at doing, get in the queue for. I do remember that regional grant. I can't remember if anybody from Cornwall was included in that.
Can I just say one thing, which is just, I mean, you know, I think that I think it makes sense to focus this trust fund on some of these bullets anyway. I think, right, you know, sort of, I think it's just going to be too confusing to have an organization that meets all of these needs at once. So I think focusing, and it obviously makes sense to focus on things where there are activities where there aren't sort of existing sources of funding, but and so I'm all for that, and sort of focusing more on the supply side and supporting the creation and the construction of new housing and the acquisition of land, but I think that these other needs are real, as Heather well knows, and I think we shouldn't lose sight of that. And maybe you know, and I think it's just you know, I think maybe there can be a group that gets together to really, and Jocelyn, you know a lot of this, so I don't mean to say that like you haven't uncovered all of the opportunities, but if there's a way, it just seems like we could really try to be as proactive as possible, and maybe setting up another. I mean, there is a rental housing support fund, Heather, is that right? There's for people who need to, who sort of need emergency support, need a month or two of rent or something covered?
Yeah, there's Clifton Reed Fund, and then typically I would use either food and fuel from the town, or I would use neighbor to neighbor. But with rents being what they are,
Yeah.
and now working with several families in which there's not a social security number in the household, that disqualifies them from all programs, that the bigger programs like for their energy assistance and food stamps and everything else. So in those cases, you know, if you have rent that's $1,400 and a $400 Eversource bill and no transportation, then you're kind of stuck. So and that's the case in a few households. So yes, there are little pots of money, but given what the rents are, it's just like a drop in the bucket right now for most families.
Right. And we talked about the housing coordinator position as being maybe somebody who can help with this and really, you know, help to identify some and match people to those resources. But I just want to make sure that we just don't walk away from this conversation thinking like, oh, there are these other sources, therefore check this off our list.
Yeah, there's really, I mean, it's really not it's not enough. I mean, if you get $1,000 from the neighbor to neighbor fund 1 month and your rent is $1,400, your situation's not going to change that drastically in the next month that you're going to then be able to cover your rent. And there's very limited housing. So it's not like you can just say, go move somewhere else, because there's really nowhere to go.
And Heather, are other sources of rental assistance like the Clifton Reed Fund limited to like 1 month? I mean, that's one of the flaws.
During right, yeah, during COVID, neighbor to neighbor expanded the amount you could request, and you're able to go back multiple times. But again, for some of our families, that's it, like you couldn't go back 8 or 9 months in a row, and you know, so it's definitely been challenging to try to cobble things together, especially for families that don't qualify for any of the state programs. I will say New Opportunities in Torrington has been a really great partner in terms of helping some of our undocumented families, because they do have a stronger set of caseworkers there who are more familiar with programs that can help that population. So I've been partnering with one of their caseworkers in particular who provides translation services for me and also helps the families connect with services. So that's been a nice partnership.
What was that organization, Heather?
That's New Opportunities in Torrington. Yep.
Well, if I can be helpful with any of this, Heather, that was my interest in joining this group, to be a coordinator or assistance on that front. So I don't know if it would make sense for us to get together offline to speak about what your needs are and how I can help.
Sure.
Great.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, why don't we, that's another topic to talk about too, but if we can work something out, certainly the housing issues aren't getting any easier. And that is one thing we as a town, that is part of the plan, is having a housing advocate or whatever. And if we can find somebody soon to do that, we can do that.
Can I throw in, Gordon? I think, you know, if you as a town decide, or, you know, if this committee decides to recommend to the Board of Selectmen that, for example, you start working on a town ordinance that would create this type of fund. As you probably noted in the Salisbury example, there's actually not a ton of detail. You know, it says generally that it's going to be for the use for affordable housing. But, you know, really what it came down to is once the ordinance was passed by the town, then the town's, in our case, the town's Affordable Housing Commission was the one that went into the detailed of, you know, right guidelines for the fund and, really figure out, how the funds would be used. So I guess I would just say, in terms of the next step, usually the ordinances don't go into a ton of detail about it. So again, if you guys felt comfortable, you could recommend that the town start working on an ordinance that, again, the details of which could be worked out as time goes on.
Jocelyn, that guidelines thing wouldn't download for me. Is there another way of sending it? I kept getting one of those horrible little 404 messages.
Oh, yeah, I will.
Was
I'll
anybody
send it,
else?
I'll send it to you, Maggie. I
Okay,
found
thank
it.
Okay,
Anybody
thanks.
else want me to send it?
Yeah, please do, because I can't get it either. I was going to ask
Well,
the same
then,
thing.
tell you what I'll do. Both of those websites didn't work, but I found both documents. I'll send them to Gordon. He can forward them on.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Anna.
Were they broken links or?
Yeah, they had
Yeah, broken
changed
links.
what they were doing.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that.
Okay, so does anybody want to make a motion to recommend to the Board of Selectmen that the town starts working on an ordinance to establish a housing trust funds along these guidance from the Center for Housing Opportunity as presented today?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay,
But
Okay.
specifying that it be kind of follow Salisbury
Mhm.
rather than the
Right.
other.
following
Mhm.
Salisbury, and also be fairly broad and general as an ordinance, and then to be, and again, the word is to start and not,
Right.
I'm sure when we get a draft, we can meet again to
Mhm.
talk about a draft before it goes in front of the town voters. Is there a second to that? Second, I see Jill's hand up first. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor can raise your hands. Anybody opposed? Looks unanimous. Great. And again, we have to wait for our legal funds to be renewed a little bit with the start of the fiscal year, but we did pass the budget, so we will have money to spend on doing the town's work legally. So that's good. Does anybody also want to think about recommending the Board of Selectmen think about hiring or appointing a housing advocate?
Yes. So
Okay.
I don't know if you want me to do both, but
Great. All right. I think it's very useful also to have, well, is there a second? Getting ahead of Mag with the second. I think it's good to take concrete steps myself.
Would it make sense to put together a job description or
Yeah,
some?
yeah.
Would be, but I think all we're doing is putting it on the radar.
Right.
And I think we're just starting to think about it. So again, if anybody has any thoughts, especially Heather. Not to
But
be
maybe
bold.
that's something that, I mean, I don't want to volunteer them, but maybe that's something sort of Heather and Jessica could work on together.
yeah,
Think about in
yeah.
the background is that, I mean,
Right.
the Board of Selectmen doesn't have to deal with that level of detail yet, but this committee could be thinking about it and
Right. Yes, I would say if anybody has thoughts about that, yeah, Pam. Do you want to?
think you're on mute.
You might be.
I would love to be involved in all of that because I have
Okay,
Oh, am I back?
Not yet, but are you saying that you would like to be involved with Jessica and Heather on that because of your background?
Can I come back yet?
Completely.
yeah, it's a little,
Maybe type into the chat.
Yes.
okay. So. Any other further comments on that second motion?
Can I just note, I'm happy to share the experience with that position in the town of Salisbury. And I also say that the town of Kent is thinking about having a similar position. So, sorry, is Gordon talking?
No, I'm quiet.
Oh, Pam, is Pam still trying to talk? I don't want to talk over anyone. I just wanted to just throw in there that, you know, that Kent is also thinking of something similar. I assume it would be a part-time role. And just wanted to throw in there that, you know, whether you might want to explore a Kent Cornwall collaboration, if it worked. I'm just throwing it in there.
And what about the idea of also having, I can't remember whether this was initially supposed to be part of it, but having some input from the ZEO so that the technical side of things were covered? Was that supposed to?
I didn't follow that one, Mag, but what was that thought?
What, I mean, I think that the housing coordinator was, I'm asking rather than stating, it was to help people navigate basically the lack of housing and how to find it, but also wasn't it in addition to help people figure out how to
Right.
work through zoning? Like if somebody were interested in making an accessory apartment, how to make that easier for them. than
Correct.
Yeah.
just- Okay,
Good memory. Yes.
Yeah.
up to a point, George.
Okay. Great. So again, if people have ideas, please give them to Heather and we'll keep that on the burners. So anyway, any other, we're getting on to our hour mark. Our next thing is next steps. It's good to have 2 steps taken today. And again, thanks Jocelyn for those thoughts to help us get there. Any thoughts on next steps? And thanks.
Gordon, do you need a specific proposal for municipal ARPA money?
Good. That's why we have a group meeting, because I thought of that and then I forgot about that. Yes, it probably, yeah, it might be good to have some talk about that. So some application in play. I mean, our group has spent its money for the current year, but more comes in the end of June. So, and that's almost here. So that would be good to draft something along, I think, especially along the, what do we call that? Work on site development, that kind of thing. Project
Yeah, I
development,
mean,
pre-plan, pre-something, what do they call it?
Acquisition and pre-development. Yeah.
I think,
Pre-development, thank you.
I think, you know, the Cornwall Housing Corporation as a nonprofit is an eligible entity to receive such funding. So I guess I would just say, you know, maybe Cornwall Housing Corp could work on a proposal for ARPA
We've started talking about it.
Okay.
Right. That might actually get you the head of the line quicker than our ordinance. I'm thinking this ordinance is probably going to be, late summer before we get it through a town meeting. Whatever. I think it's good just to get a confirming message out there would be good.
You could do both, couldn't you?
Good.
For any reason, Jocelyn, not to, other than work, but
No, I mean, I think it's a great idea, again, for the Cornwall Housing Corporation to put in a proposal to the town for ARPA funding. And also to work on the ordinance simultaneously. I don't know, Gordon knows, sort of what the timeframes are for both of those, but I don't think there's any reason not to do both personally.
Yes. I think it's all both possible. Okay. So that's 3 next steps. That's good. I see this sort of being like agenda items and for next meeting. Good to have tasks. So does it
Can I throw one more thing in there, Gordon, that I think,
just keep on throwing here?
sorry.
Yep. That's fine. That's why we're
In
here.
terms of state-owned land, this is something else that we're trying to get the state to potentially help us focus on with a couple, 2-3 towns at once. So if you know of specific state-owned properties that you think would be appropriate for housing,
Yeah.
let us know what the addresses are, and
Right.
Litchfield County Center for Housing Opportunity can try to figure out how best to, as you know, disposition of state-owned land is a complicated process, but I think we can try to help multiple towns go through that at once, and advocate for those things happening as quickly as possible.
that is fantastic. Gordon, do you need help on that? Can this committee help in any way, or do you know
Well, actually,
where all these sites
we
are?
went over the list. Yeah. I went over the list with Ken Keskinen like 25 years ago. So we actually walked some of these pieces, and we're quietly told to go away. But we're back. And I did talk to Maria Horn about this issue, with DEP on the line also. So there are people that know that this is sort of like new thinking and good thinking. So I have just right now 3 potential sites I can think of that, again, when we're not talking major pieces, and these are all adjacent to 2 state or town roads without huge driveways, or they're not,
Bonnie Brook was 10 units on 1 acre, so we don't need
Correct.
a lot.
Don't need a lot. You need a place.
Yeah.
So and some of them are disconnected from the rest of the parks. They're just old, gravel mines or places they bought just because they could. So so let's that'd be great. I think that's I think Cornwall probably has one of the highest percentages of land owned by the state.
I gotta jump
I
off.
can do that. So I will
Thank you, Jocelyn.
put that as
Thank
number
you.
4. And can I mention that to our, oops, she's gonna go. Anyway, I will mention that to our board. That's one of our projects, but I think as you should know, this is the top listed priority of the Board of Selectmen. So it's good to say we're taking 4 different steps.
Can you just recap the 4 steps?
The 4 steps are 1. No, I forgot. All right. So first is the ordinance. Second is appointing a housing advocate. Third was the ARPA funds. 4th was the state land. And we could say 5th, the idea of, a Small Cities Block Grant renovation
Mhm.
thing next year. But so we can come up with 5 things, five things in 1 hour. That's a good,
Great.
that's good.
Jill,
Excellent.
Jill had her hand up, didn't she?
Jill,
It's on mute.
Jill has her hand up.
She's
She's
trying
on
to.
mute.
trying
She
to
can't get
get-
off. Oh, now
Okay,
you're
there
off
we
mute.
You're good.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Gordon, I know that the state just acquired a lot more land. So there are pieces of state land in Cornwall that you and Ken Keskinen didn't talk about.
Yeah.
Correct,
Yes, they knew.
correct. But I know what they just bought. And I
Yeah.
know the soil types. I know.
Okay, fine.
Nearby.
I'm just pointing it out.
Yes, thank you. Yep, been keeping track. Thank you. Good. Had to give Ken credit though. Good.
Yeah.
Why not? Okay, good. Any other comments? All right. I'd like to thank you very much. One of the most productive hours we've had recently in town government. So thank you all for your input. Moving this forward, as I said, it's a national thing. So it's good to have these practical steps, each of which will hopefully help, and in combination will make a difference.
Are we gonna meet again in a month, or are we gonna?
I think in a month, I was thinking we'll wait for the ordinance, but now we've got 4 other things to talk about. So, and again, we can get some paper going. So,
Right.
yeah, no, I think those are all good. And then Heather will have some thoughts on the housing advocate and things. And it's great to hear Jocelyn's going to be prodding the state. Good stuff.
Right.
Okay. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks.
And
Thank
is there a
you.
motion to adjourn?
Motion to
Okay.
adjourn.
Oh, move.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you for
Thanks.
Take
recording,
care,
Richard.
folks. All right. Thanks for recording us, Richard. Take care. Any public comment? I see there's Nancy's there from the public. Oh, no comments? Okay. Thank you. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.